The most dangerous man in 3 counties was buying flowers when a child in an ivory dress approached him alone, lifted a pouch of coins with trembling hands, and asked, "If I pay, can you fight my monsters?" Lawson Carter saw the bruises shaped like adult fingers, saw the dirt under her nails from nervous digging, and recognized the terror he'd worn as a boy hiding from his own father. What came next would force him to destroy his brother to save her. She couldn't speak without shaking. He wouldn't listen to no. 7 years old. That's how old Daisy Lynn Parker was when she decided to hire the most dangerous man in the city. No one walked up to Lawson Carter. Not without permission. Not without fear. But this little girl in an ivory dress, stained from too many washes, ribbons tied crooked by exhausted hands. She walked straight up to him. No parent behind her, no guardian protecting her. Just a cloth pouch, filled with coins, $4.73s, everything she had. "If I pay," her voice barely rose above a whisper, "can you fight my monsters?" Lawson Carter had stared down killers, built an empire on fear, made grown men cross the street to avoid him. But this child, with bruises shaped like adult fingers on her wrist, with dirt under her nails from nervous digging, with terror in her eyes that he recognized. She did something no one else had managed in 20 years. She reminded him what it felt like to be powerless. Because 30 years ago, Bo had been that child, hiding in closets, counting ceiling tiles, praying someone would notice. No one did. But what Bo didn't know yet was that this little girl's monster had a name he recognized, a face he'd protected, and the choice he was about to make would tear his own family apart. Now, a little girl was asking him to become the person no one had been for him, but there was a problem. The monster she was paying him to fight? The man who came home drunk every night, who cornered her mother in the kitchen, who put his fist through doors, who made them both count the hours until he arrived. That monster had a name. Wade Red Dalton. And Red Dalton wasn't just any abuser. He was connected, protected, dangerous. But here's what Daisy didn't know, what no one knew, what Bo was about to discover when he started investigating. Red Dalton wasn't just some random monster. He was someone Bo knew, someone Bo had protected, someone Bo called family. What happened next would force the most dangerous man in 3 counties to choose between the brother he'd spent his life protecting and the child who'd just asked him to save hers. And that choice would change everything. Bo didn't need the flowers, didn't particularly want them. But standing at Miller's flower stand was the kind of ordinary activity that reminded him he could still pass for normal when necessary. That beneath the reputation and the violence and the empire built on careful brutality, there was still a man who could appreciate beauty without destroying it. That's when she appeared. Hey, if this story touches your heart even a little, go ahead and subscribe. Join our family of hope and love, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Let's share this journey together. No parent followed. No guardian emerged from the shade of the buildings lining the street. Just a small girl in an ivory dress that had been white once, before too many washes in hard water turned it the color of old pearls. She moved with the careful purpose of someone who'd planned this moment, rehearsed it, committed to it before doubt could take root. Her steps were measured, deliberate. Not the carefree skip of childhood, but the calculated approach of someone who'd learned that survival required strategy. Bo noticed her the way he noticed everything, with the instincts that had kept him breathing in a world designed to stop men like him. The vendor kept wrapping flowers, humming something low and formless that might have been a hymn or might have been nothing at all. A couple passed by arguing about dinner plans, their voices carrying the worn-down quality of people who'd had the same argument 1,000 times. A car horn echoed from 2 blocks over. The ordinary world continued its rhythm, unaware that something was shifting in the space between heartbeats. Daisy Lynn Parker stopped directly in front of him. Not beside him, not near him, in front of him, where he had no choice but to acknowledge her presence. Where avoidance became impossible, and ignorance became complicity. She held a cloth pouch in both hands. The fabric was faded calico, stitched with uneven loops that suggested small fingers working thread through material too thick for their strength. It bulged with the weight of coins collected from desperate places, couch cushions, forgotten jars, fountains where other children threw wishes. The stitching was pink thread on blue fabric, the kind of mismatch that happened when you used whatever was available rather than what matched. One corner had been reinforced where the original seam had torn, small knots visible where inexperienced hands had tried to make broken things hold together. She lifted it toward him with trembling hands that tried to be steady. The tremor was barely visible, but Bo saw it. Saw everything. Bo saw the dirt embedded beneath her fingernails, the kind that didn't come from playing but from nervous digging, from finding comfort in sensation when emotion became too much to hold. The way her shoulders curved inward, as if she'd learned to make herself smaller, less noticeable, less targetable. The careful ribbons in her hair that someone, her mother, probably, had tied that morning with love that couldn't protect her from what waited when darkness fell. One ribbon was slightly crooked, the bow lopsided, suggesting rushed morning routines and exhausted hands trying to create normalcy. The bruise on her wrist shaped like adult fingers, fading to yellow-green but still visible if you knew how to look. And Bo always knew how to look. Her shoes were worn at the toes, the white canvas stained beyond any bleach's ability to restore. Her dress had been hemmed and re-hemmed as she grew, the original hemline still visible beneath the new one. Everything about her spoke of care applied to things that couldn't be replaced, of love stretched thin trying to cover needs it couldn't quite reach. "If I pay," her voice came out stronger than the fear in her eyes. She'd practiced this. Probably in front of a mirror, testing different tones until she found one that didn't shake. "Can you fight my monsters?" The question landed between them with the weight of something that couldn't be unsaid. The flower vendor kept humming, then didn't. The sound died mid-note as the old man registered what was happening at his stand. The arguing couple turned the corner, their voices fading into the ambient noise of the street. A bicycle bell chimed somewhere down the street, clear and innocent. The world moved on, oblivious to the fact that a 7-year-old girl had just walked straight into the territory of the most dangerous man in 3 counties and asked him to save her life. But what this child was really asking for would cost Bo everything he'd built. Because the monster she wanted him to fight? He was closer to Bo than anyone could imagine. Lawson Carter had stared down killers without flinching, had negotiated with men who wore violence like cologne, who treated cruelty as currency, had built an empire on the kind of reputation that made grown men cross the street when they saw him coming, that made his name into something mothers used to frighten children into good behavior. He'd sat across tables from men planning murders, and never showed a flicker of the rage that lived beneath his careful control. But this small girl with her homemade pouch and her rehearsed bravery? She'd done something no one else had managed in 20 years. She'd reminded him what it felt like to be powerless. His jaw tightened, not with anger, but with recognition, because he'd seen that particular kind of fear before. In mirrors, when he was young enough to still hope someone would notice. In nightmares that decades hadn't managed to erase. In the face of the 5-year-old boy he used to be, hiding in closets while his father's rage shook the walls and promised things worse than the bruises that would follow. Bo didn't take the pouch. Not yet. Instead, he lowered himself, slowly, deliberately, until his eyes were level with hers. Until the man the streets feared became small enough for a terrified child to trust. His knees protested the movement. He wasn't as young as he used to be. But he folded himself down until he could meet her gaze directly, until the height difference that gave him advantage became something that might offer her comfort instead. What kind of monsters? His voice came out softer than he'd spoken in years. The southern drawl he usually kept controlled, gentling the words into something that wouldn't break what was already fragile. The drawl was heritage he usually minimized, knowing that softness could be mistaken for weakness in his world. But for this child, he let it bloom. Let his voice carry the warmth of magnolia summers and front porch conversations of a South that existed in memory more than reality. Daisy's fingers twisted the fabric of her dress, creating new wrinkles in material that had been carefully ironed despite its age. She looked at him, really looked, measuring whether this dangerous man might be the answer to prayers she'd stopped believing anyone heard. Her eyes were brown, he noticed. Deep brown like good earth, like the color of things that grow. Too old for 7. Too calculating. Too aware of dangers that childhood should have kept distant. The kind that comes when Mama leaves for her night shift at the diner. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper, as if volume might summon the very thing she feared. As if speaking too loudly might reach across the city blocks and alert the monster to her betrayal. His name is Red, Wade Dalton, but everyone calls him Red because that's what his face gets when he drinks, and he drinks every night. The moment she said that name, Beau's blood went cold. Because Wade, Red Dalton, wasn't just any monster. What Daisy was about to tell him would shatter everything Beau thought he knew about loyalty and family. She described it the way children describe routine. Factual. Detached. As if distance might make the horror manageable. As if treating violence like weather reports might make it less personal, less devastating. How Red's boots on the stairs meant the screaming would start soon. How her mother would use her tired voice, the one that said, "Please, not tonight. I worked a double." The voice that tried to negotiate with rage, as if rage understood reason. How Daisy had learned to count ceiling tiles in her bedroom while pretending the crashes and shouting were just thunder, just storms, just anything other than what they were. He tells Mama she's stupid for working so hard, that she's wasting her time trying to be respectable when everyone knows what she really is. Daisy's hands went still on her dress, the nervous fidgeting replaced by a stillness that spoke of dissociation, of mentally removing herself from the moment. I don't know what that means, but it makes Mama cry, and when she cries, he gets madder. Says she's trying to manipulate him. Says she's putting on a show. Then he gets louder and his words get meaner and sometimes he throws things. She paused, swallowing hard. The small sound of that swallow carried weight. The effort it took to keep talking, to keep testifying to horrors that should have remained unspoken. Last Tuesday, he pushed her into the kitchen counter. Her arm got a big purple bruise shaped like fingers. I counted them. 5 fingers. You could see every one. She told her boss she fell. Told me she was clumsy, but I saw it happen through the crack in my door. I saw him grab her and I saw him push and I saw the way she caught herself against the counter so she wouldn't hit the floor. Beau remained motionless, but every word landed like a physical blow. The flower vendor had stopped rapping entirely now, his weathered hands frozen mid-motion. Even the ordinary noise of the street seemed to fade into background static as this child testified to a war that happened every night in an apartment just blocks from here, invisible to everyone who didn't want to see. Mama doesn't know I'm here. She thinks I'm at the library. She thinks I don't understand what's happening. Daisy's gaze dropped to the pouch between them, unable to hold the weight of eye contact while confession continued. But I do. I understand everything. She looked back up with eyes that had calculated too much too young, eyes that had learned arithmetic of violence and algebra of survival before mastering multiplication tables. He breaks things, dishes, picture frames. Last month he put his fist through the bathroom door when Mama locked herself inside. The hole is still there. Mama covered it with a towel, but I can see it when the towel falls. It's the shape of his hand. Like he's always reaching through, even when he's not there. What Daisy didn't know was that every word she spoke was pushing Bo toward an impossible choice. One that would force him to become either the man who saved her, or the man who protected the monster destroying her family. Bo's hands curled into fists, not with anger at her, but with recognition of the script she was reading from. He'd memorized the same lines once. Different monster, same terror, different address, same hell, different decade, same nightmare. He saw his own childhood reflected in her careful words and measured fear, the way she'd learned to catalog violence like weather patterns, predicting storms by the smell of alcohol and the weight of footsteps. The way she'd developed systems for survival that no child should need to develop. The afternoon Daisy Lynn Parker walked into Lawson Carter's world, the temperature sat at 93 degrees, and the air smelled like jasmine dying in the heat. The sweetness of the blooms had turned cloying in the humidity, their beauty corrupted by excess. Bo stood at Miller's flower stand on the corner of 5th and Beauregard, watching the vendor's weathered hands wrap magnolia stems in brown paper with the kind of precision that came from decades of the same motion. Miller never rushed, never made mistakes. Just wrapped flowers with the steady rhythm of a man who'd found his place in the world and made peace with it. He'd been there longer than necessary, letting the ordinary rhythm of commerce settle over him like a disguise he wore when he needed to remember what normal looked like. Bo had meetings later, the kind that happened in back rooms with men who spoke in coded language about shipments and territories and problems that needed solving. But for now, in the late afternoon sun with sweat dampening his collar, he was just a man buying flowers. Just someone participating in the small transactions that made up civilian life. That's when she appeared. No parent behind her. No guardian's hand on her shoulder guiding her through dangerous streets. Just a child in an ivory dress that had been white once. Moving with purpose that children her age shouldn't possess. She navigated the sidewalk with the awareness of someone 3 times her age, her gaze scanning, assessing, calculating before each step. Bo noticed her the way he noticed everything, with instincts honed by survival in a world that punished inattention. The vendor kept humming something low and tuneless. A couple passed arguing about dinner, their voices carrying the exhaustion of people whose relationship had become obligation. A car horn echoed 2 blocks over, sharp and impatient. The world continued its oblivious dance. Daisy stopped directly in front of him. Not beside, not near. In front, where acknowledgement became mandatory rather than optional. Where the power dynamic of height and danger had to be confronted rather than circumvented. She held a cloth pouch in both hands, faded calico stitched with uneven loops that spoke of small fingers working thread through stubborn fabric. The pouch had been created with determination overcoming skill, with need driving hands that hadn't quite mastered the technique. It bulged with coins collected from desperate places, couch cushions where lost change accumulated, forgotten jars in the backs of cupboards, fountains where other children threw wishes instead of survival plans. She lifted it toward him with hands that trembled despite their determination. The tremor was visible in her fingers, in the slight shake of the pouch, but her eyes remained steady. She'd decided this, committed to this, and now she would follow through even though fear threatened to steal her voice. Bo saw everything in that moment. The dirt embedded beneath her fingernails from nervous picking, from finding texture and sensation to ground herself when emotion became too overwhelming. The way her shoulders curved inward, making her body smaller, less noticeable, less targetable. A defense mechanism learned from predators who hunted in her own home. The careful ribbons in her hair that someone had tied with love that couldn't protect her when darkness fell. One ribbon was slightly askew, suggesting morning routines rushed by exhaustion, by a mother trying to create normalcy while running on empty. The bruise on her wrist shaped like adult fingers, fading to yellow-green, but still visible if you knew how to look. And Bo always knew how to look. Her dress had been mended at the hem, careful stitches trying to extend its life through another growth spurt. Her shoes showed wear at the toes, the canvas stained beyond bleach's ability to restore. A small tear in her sock had been darned with thread that didn't quite match. Everything about her spoke of care applied to things that couldn't be replaced, of love stretched impossibly thin, trying to cover needs it couldn't quite reach. "If I pay..." Her voice came out stronger than the fear in her eyes. She'd practiced this. Bo could hear the rehearsal in her tone, the way she'd tested different approaches until finding one that carried authority her age couldn't naturally command. "Can you fight my monsters?" The question landed between them with weight that had nothing to do with coins or currency or the transaction she was proposing. It landed with the weight of desperation and hope and the kind of courage that comes only when every other option has been exhausted. The flower vendor's humming stopped mid-note, the silence sudden and startling. Even the street noise seemed to fade into static as this child stood before the most dangerous man in 3 counties and asked him to save her life. Lawson Carter had stared down killers without flinching, had negotiated with men who wore violence like expensive cologne, who measured their worth in fear generated, had built an empire on reputation that made grown men cross streets to avoid him, that made his name synonymous with consequences swift and permanent. He'd sat at tables where life and death were discussed like line items in budgets, where human suffering was calculated into profit margins. But this small girl with her homemade pouch and rehearsed bravery had done something no one else managed in 20 years. She'd reminded him what powerlessness felt like, had dragged him back to a childhood he'd spent decades trying to bury beneath success and control, and the illusion that he'd escaped. His jaw tightened with recognition because he'd seen that particular fear before. In mirrors when he was young enough to still believe someone might notice, might intervene, might care. In nightmares that decades and therapy and whiskey hadn't managed to erase. In the face of the 5-year-old boy he used to be, hiding while his father's rage shook walls and promised worse. The vendor was watching now, his old eyes sharp with understanding. Miller had lived in this neighborhood for 70 years. Had seen generations of children grow up in the shadow of violence normalized, in homes where brutality was background noise. He didn't intervene, wasn't his place, wasn't his business. But he watched, witnessed, because sometimes bearing witness was all that separated tragedy from complete erasure. Bo lowered himself slowly until his eyes were level with hers, his knees protesting the movement, joints reminding him that he wasn't as young as he used to be. Until the man the streets feared became small enough for a terrified child to trust. He folded himself down carefully, making himself vulnerable in a public space, making himself smaller so she could feel larger. "What kind of monsters?" His voice came out softer than he'd spoken in years, southern drawl, gentling words that wouldn't break what was already fragile. The accent he usually kept controlled bloomed now, warm and careful, carrying echoes of summers on front porches and sweet tea in mason jars, of a South that existed more in memory than reality. Daisy's fingers twisted her dress fabric, creating new wrinkles in material that had been carefully ironed despite its age. Despite the wear. Despite the fact that ironing it probably meant standing over a board in a hot apartment, adding more heat to already sweltering space, but doing it anyway because maintaining dignity mattered even when everything else was falling apart. She looked at him, really looked, measuring whether this dangerous man might be the answer to prayers she'd stopped believing anyone heard. Her eyes were too old, too knowing. They'd seen things that eyes her age should remain innocent of. The kind that comes when Mama leaves for her night shift at the diner. Her voice dropped to barely above whisper, as if volume might summon the very thing she feared. as if speaking too loudly might somehow reach across the city blocks and alert the monster to her betrayal. His name is Red, Wade Dalton, but everyone calls him Red because that's what his face gets when he drinks. It starts at his neck and crawls up like he's choking, but it's just the anger coming to the surface. And he drinks every night. Sometimes he starts before Mama even leaves. Sometimes he's waiting for her to go so he can start. She described it the way children describe routine: factual, detached, as if distance might make horror manageable, as if reporting it like news might make it feel less personal, less devastating. How Red's boots on the stairs meant screaming would start soon, the heavy tread announcing his arrival before his key turned in the lock. How her mother would use her tired voice, the one that said, "Please, not tonight. I worked a double." The voice that tried to negotiate with rage as if rage understood reason, as if exhaustion might inspire mercy. How Daisy had learned to count ceiling tiles in her bedroom, 147, she knew them all now, while pretending crashes and shouting were just thunder, just storms, just anything other than what they were. He tells Mama she's stupid for working so hard, that she's wasting her time trying to be respectable when everyone knows what she really is. Daisy's hands went still. I don't know what that means, but it makes Mama cry. And when she cries, he gets madder. She paused, swallowing hard, the small sound of that swallow carrying the weight of forcing words past fear. Last Tuesday, he pushed her into the kitchen counter. Her arm got a big purple bruise shaped like fingers. I counted them. 5 fingers. You could see every knuckle, every joint. She told her boss she fell. Told me she was just clumsy, that she's always bumping into things. But I saw it happen through the crack in my door. I was supposed to be sleeping, but I was watching and I saw him grab her and I saw him push and I saw the way she had to catch herself so she wouldn't fall all the way down. Beau remained motionless, but every word landed like physical blows to his chest, to the places he'd thought he'd armored decades ago. The flower vendor had stopped rapping entirely now. Even the ordinary noise of the street seemed to fade as this child testified to war that happened every night in an apartment just blocks from here, invisible to everyone who didn't want to see. Wars that happened behind closed doors, while neighbors turned up televisions and told themselves it wasn't their business. What Beau was about to learn would make this decision even more impossible. Because Red Dalton's violence wasn't random. It was calculated, protected, and connected to people Beau had sworn to protect. Mama doesn't know I'm here. She thinks I'm at the library reading books about princesses. Daisy's gaze dropped to the pouch between them. She thinks I don't understand what's happening. But I do. I understand everything. She looked back up with eyes that had calculated too much too young. He breaks things. Dishes. Picture frames with our photos. Last month he put his fist through the bathroom door when Mama locked herself inside. She was crying and he was yelling, and I heard her say she just needed a minute and he punched the door. The hole is still there. Mama covered it with a towel, but I can see it when the towel falls. It's the shape of his hand. Like he's always reaching through even when he's not there. Like the door can't protect anyone because he already proved it can't. Her voice remained steady, but Beau heard the fractures beneath. Sometimes he doesn't hit her. Sometimes he just yells and breaks things and makes her cry. But the not hitting times are scarier because I know they're just waiting. That eventually the yelling won't be enough, and his fists will have to do what his words can't. Mama thinks the not hitting times mean it's getting better, but I know it's just getting ready to get worse. Beau's hands curled into fists, not with anger at her, but with recognition of the script she was reading from. He'd memorized the same lines once. Different monster, same terror. Different address, same hell. He saw his own childhood reflected in her careful words and measured fear, the way she'd learned to catalog violence like weather patterns, predicting storms by the smell of alcohol and the weight of footsteps. The way survival required developing systems no child should need to develop. His own father had been different, but the same. Less alcohol, more cold calculation. The kind of monster who hurt methodically rather than explosively, who planned cruelty like others planned vacations. But the effect was identical. The fear, the hypervigilance, the way young Beau had learned to read micro-expressions and voice tones, developed expertise in predicting violence that should have been reserved for advanced psychology degrees. He'd been 5 when he first understood his father was a monster. 7 when he stopped believing anyone would save them. 12 when his father finally died, and Beau realized the ghost would haunt him longer than the living man ever had. I saved every coin I could find. Daisy's voice cracked for the first time, the rehearsed composure finally fracturing under the weight of speaking horror aloud. It's $4.73. I counted it 6 times to make sure. I know that's not a lot for fighting monsters. The internet said bodyguards cost hundreds of dollars, maybe thousands. But it's everything I have. Tears gathered in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall, blinking rapidly. Jaw set with determination that would have been admirable if it weren't so heartbreaking. So if you can't fight all of them, maybe you could just scare him? Just enough so he stops hurting Mama? You don't have to make him go away forever. Just make him stop. Please. But Beau was about to make a promise that would cost him more than money. What he didn't know yet was that helping this child would force him to betray everything he'd built his empire on. The magnolia bouquet in Beau's hand suddenly felt absurd. Expensive flowers for a woman who didn't need them while a child stood before him offering her life savings for protection that should have been her birthright. Protection that should have been woven into the fabric of her existence rather than something she had to purchase with fountain pennies and couch cushion quarters. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if fear overrode desperation, if the proximity of a strange man triggered the warnings she'd surely been taught. When she didn't move, when she held steady with that devastating bravery, he placed one hand gently on top of the pouch, covering her small fingers with his scarred ones. His hands told stories too, if you knew how to read them. Scars across the knuckles from fights in his youth. A burn mark on his thumb from a cigarette held by his father against his skin when he was 8. Punishment for talking back. The calluses of someone who'd built an empire with violence, but remembered where he came from. Daisy looked at his hand covering hers, and something in her posture relaxed fractionally, as if his touch confirmed rather than frightened. "You don't need to pay me, Daisy Lynn." He said her full name even though she hadn't given it, and her eyes widened at confirmation that he knew exactly who she was. That he'd done what men like him always did, gathered information, assessed threats, understood his territory down to the names of the innocent living inside it. That she existed in his awareness already, had been counted and cataloged without ever knowing she was visible. "I know who you are. I know where you live. I know your mama works double shifts at Jerry's Diner on Route 9. I know she's been trying to save enough to move to a better apartment. I know things about your situation that would surprise you." "But," she started. Confusion crossing her features because the world had taught her that everything cost something, that nothing came free, that protection was a commodity purchased rather than a right freely given. "No payment," he repeated, voice carrying the finality that ended negotiations, that made hardened criminals accept terms they didn't like. "You keep your $4.73. Buy yourself something sweet, something that tastes like childhood should taste, like Saturday mornings and birthday parties and summers that last forever. Ice cream from the shop on 3rd Street. The bookstore by the library has that series about the girl detective you've been checking out from the library over and over. Buy the next one. Own something that's yours." He stood slowly, his full height casting shadow over her small frame. But he didn't loom, didn't intimidate. Instead, he handed her the magnolia bouquet. Flowers that cost more than her pouch held, wrapped in paper that smelled like better futures. like possibility, like hope. The magnolias were cream-colored and perfect, their petals thick and fragrant, the kind of beauty that existed for no reason other than to be beautiful. I didn't say I wouldn't help. His drawl thickened with something that might have been old memory or new purpose, with the weight of decades he'd spent running from a past that had finally caught up with him in the form of a 7-year-old girl with a calico pouch. Give these to your mama when she gets home tonight. Tell her they're from the flower stand owner. Tell her beauty should be celebrated, not beaten down. Tell her someone in the world thinks she deserves flowers instead of bruises. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a card, plain white, no name, no business logo, just a phone number written in ink in his own careful hand. 10 digits that connected to a phone he kept for emergencies, for moments when the Empire needed to be contacted by someone who didn't have access to normal channels. He'd written this number on maybe 5 cards in his entire life. This was the 6th. You or your mama call this number if Red shows up before I'm done. Someone will answer. Someone will come. He pressed it into her palm, the card still warm from being carried against his chest. You understand me, Daisy Lynn? Day or night. 2 in the morning, 3 in the afternoon, doesn't matter. You call and someone comes. That's a promise. And I keep my promises. Always have. That's how I built what I built. By being a man whose word means something. She nodded, clutching the flowers and card like lifelines, like artifacts from a world she'd only read about in books. The magnolias were nearly as big as her torso, their stems wrapped carefully so the thorns wouldn't cut her hands. Good girl. Something shifted behind his eyes, that locked door opening onto a room he'd sealed shut decades ago, onto the boy who'd needed someone to keep promises and found only silence. Now go on to that library. Read something about princesses and dragons. Let me handle the monsters. That's my job. That's what I'm good at. You just be 7 years old for as long as you still can. Daisy turned to leave, then stopped after 3 steps. Mr. Carter? Yes? Do you think... She hesitated, then pushed forward with the bravery of children who've already lost everything safe and therefore have nothing left to risk. Do you think monsters can be scared of anything? Beau's smile was small, sharp, and carried the weight of violence held in careful check. Violence that knew exactly when and how to deploy itself for maximum effect. Baby girl, everyone's scared of something. Even monsters. Especially monsters. They're scared of being exposed. Scared of losing control. Scared of people who fight back instead of running away. Scared of consequences they spent their whole lives avoiding. He tilted his head slightly. Red Dalton just doesn't know it yet. But he's about to get an education. And school's about to start. What Red Dalton didn't know was that his days of terrorizing women and children were numbered. Lawson Carter was about to teach him a lesson about consequences, and this education would be permanent. She nodded once, understanding passing between them that transcended her years, then disappeared around the corner. Small ivory dress, big magnolia bouquet creating comic contrast, and $4.73 still safe in her homemade pouch. The flower vendor finally spoke, his weathered voice carrying knowledge of streets that had seen generations of violence, of promises made and broken, of children who asked for help and adults who looked away. That's a dangerous promise you just made, Mr. Carter. Beau watched the corner where Daisy had vanished, his hands curling into fists that could break bones but today would build something else entirely. No. The dangerous promise was made the day Wade Dalton decided a woman and child were his property to destroy, that they existed for his convenience and his rage, that he could hurt them without consequence because no one was paying attention. His drawl sharpened into something cold and absolute. I'm just keeping the one that matters. I'm just being the person someone should have been for me. He walked away from the flower stand with empty hands and a purpose that felt like resurrection. or revenge, or maybe, finally, redemption. Miller watched him go, then carefully wrapped another bouquet, humming quietly as he worked. Some things couldn't be spoken aloud, but they could be witnessed. And sometimes witnessing was enough to change everything. Sometimes one person paying attention was all it took. Bo made one phone call from the parking lot behind Miller's flower stand, standing in the shade of the building where the heat was marginally less oppressive. Ryan answered on the first ring the way he always did, voice neutral and ready, trained never to show surprise or ask unnecessary questions. I need full surveillance on Wade Dalton. Street name Red. Lives with Caroline Parker and her daughter at the Magnolia Court Apartments on 7th. Building B, 2nd floor, Unit 2C. I want eyes on him 24/7 starting tonight. No gaps in coverage. What level? Ryan asked, which was his way of asking how far this would go, what resources to deploy, whether this was observation or preparation for something more permanent. Everything. Patterns, associates, financials, warrants, parking tickets, library fines. I want to know every place he drinks, every debt he owes, every person he's crossed, every ex-girlfriend, every employer, every cop who's had dealings with him. Bo's voice dropped into the register that made grown men nervous. And Ryan, I want video. Every time he's near that apartment. Every time he raises his voice or his hand. Every moment of intimidation. Every threat. Every act of violence. Document everything. I want evidence that would hold up in federal court. We're building a case, not just gathering intelligence. What Ryan didn't know yet was that the investigation he was about to conduct would uncover secrets that connected Red Dalton to people in Bo's own organization. The truth was more complicated and more dangerous than anyone realized. By 9 that evening, Bo sat in his downtown office watching the first surveillance feed come through on the bank of monitors Ryan had set up. Red Dalton stumbled out of Mac's Tavern on 4th Street at 9:47 p.m., already drunk enough that his gait listed to the left. He was a big man, thick through the shoulders in the way that came from manual labor and genetics, not gyms and protein shakes. His face carried the permanent flush of someone whose relationship with alcohol had moved from recreational to medicinal to necessary years ago. His clothes were stained, his boots worn, his posture aggressive even when no one was challenging him. Bo watched Red drive, poorly, weaving slightly between lanes, probably over the legal limit, but not enough that any cop would bother stopping him on an empty street, to Magnolia Court and park crooked across 2 spaces. Watched him take the stairs to the 2nd floor with heavy footfalls that probably announced his arrival 3 apartments away. Watched him fumble with keys for 30 seconds, his coordination compromised by alcohol, before the door opened and Caroline Parker stood there in her diner uniform, exhaustion written in every line of her body. She was prettier than Bo had expected. Mid-30s, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that had probably started the day neat, but was now slightly disheveled. Her uniform was clean despite the long shift, her posture straight despite obvious exhaustion. She had the kind of face that suggested she'd been beautiful once, before life and fear and survival had carved away the softness. But traces remained, in her eyes, in the line of her jaw, in the way she held herself with dignity, even while visibly bracing for what came next. The audio feed was clear enough to catch Red's first words. "'Bout time you opened the damn door. What, you ashamed of me now? Standing there like you're too good to let me in?" His voice was slurred but angry, the kind of drunk that turned mean rather than sloppy. Caroline's response was too quiet to hear, but Red's escalation wasn't. "Don't you walk away from me. I'm talking to you. You think you're better than me 'cause you serve coffee to truckers? 'Cause you wear that little uniform and smile for tips?" While Bo watched this domestic terrorism unfold on his screens, he had no idea that Red's connections went deeper into his own organization than he could have imagined. The betrayal he was about to uncover would test every loyalty he'd built. The door slammed and Bo switched to the interior camera Ryan's team had already installed. A risk, technically illegal, but a necessary one. The apartment was small, clean despite its age, furnished with mismatched pieces that suggested secondhand stores and careful budgeting. A child's drawings covered one wall. Crayon pictures of houses with gardens, families holding hands, sunshine and flowers. The kind of art that revealed what Daisy wished her life looked like. He watched Red follow Caroline into the kitchen, watched her try to create distance by moving toward the sink, watched the confrontation build with the inevitability of a script they'd both performed too many times. Red didn't hit her that night, just cornered her against the counter, his bulk and volume doing the violence his fists abstained from. His body blocked her exit routes, his height intimidated, his voice filled the small space with rage. Just shouted about disrespect and ingratitude, and how she'd be nothing without him. How she'd be on the streets if he left. How she should be grateful he puts up with her and her brat kid. You think anyone else would want you? Single mother, barely makes minimum wage, kid with no father? I'm all you got. You remember that. The words were weapons, calculated to wound psychologically since he wasn't wounding physically tonight. You leave me, you got nothing. No one wants used goods. Just made her small in her own kitchen while her daughter counted ceiling tiles in the next room, visible through the doorway in her bed, eyes open but pretending to sleep. Bo watched Daisy watch, saw the girl track her mother's movements, saw her flinch when Red's voice got louder, saw her hands clutch her blanket when he moved toward Caroline suddenly. Bo watched for 3 hours, his jaw tight and his hands clenched on the desk. He'd ordered the surveillance to build a case, to find leverage, to construct the trap that would remove Red Dalton permanently from these women's lives. But watching the feed, he wasn't thinking about strategy. He was remembering. His own father had been bigger than Red, meaner, more creative with his cruelty, the kind of monster who hurt methodically rather than explosively, who planned torture like others planned dinner parties. But the script was identical. The alcohol-soaked rage, though his father had preferred whiskey to beer. The shouting that escalated to violence. The way his mother had made herself small and apologetic. The way young Bo had learned to count and breathe and wait for storms to pass. He'd been 5 the first time he understood his father was a monster. The man had beaten his mother unconscious over a burned dinner, and 5-year-old Bo had called 911 only to watch his mother lie to the police, protect her husband, send them away. 7 when he stopped believing anyone would save them, when he realized that adults who could help had decided not to. 12 when his father finally drank himself into a grave that Bo didn't cry at. 20 when he realized the ghost haunted him more effectively than the living man ever had. He'd spent 30 years building an empire specifically so he'd never be powerless again. So he'd never be that 5-year-old boy hiding while monsters raged. And now a 7-year-old girl had walked up to him and reminded him that all the power in the world didn't matter if you didn't use it to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Ryan arrived around midnight with coffee. Rough viewing? Textbook domestic abuse. Psychological warfare when physical violence isn't available. He's training her to accept worse. Establishing control through fear and degradation. Bo didn't take his eyes off the monitors. How long until we have complete background? Morning. My guy at the courthouse is pulling records now. Should have everything by 7 a.m. Ryan set the coffee on the desk. What's the play here? That depends on what we find, but one way or another, Red Dalton is leaving that apartment. He just doesn't know it yet. Ryan arrived at Bo's office at 6 a.m. with coffee and a file 3 inches thick, dropping it on the desk with the solid thud of compiled evidence. Wade Dalton is a walking federal case waiting to happen, he said, spreading documents across the polished surface. 2 outstanding warrants in Alabama for check fraud, wrote bad checks totaling about $8,000 across 3 counties. 3 years behind on child support for 2 kids in Mississippi. He's never seen them, never sent a dime. Currently working under the table at Branson Construction, hasn't filed taxes in 6 years, collects disability checks for a back injury he doesn't have. The man's been scamming every system available. But what was buried deeper in that file would change everything. The truth about Red's connections was about to surface, and it would force Bo to choose between the empire he'd built and the child he'd promised to save. Bo studied the papers with the focus he brought to business deals worth millions, reading every detail, noting every discrepancy. Red Dalton's life was a masterclass in avoiding consequences, bouncing between states, using different names, working cash jobs that left no paper trail. What about violence? Assault charges in 2019, pled down to disturbing the peace. Bar fight in 2021, witnesses didn't cooperate, probably threatened them. Protective order filed by an ex-girlfriend in 2020, expired when she moved out of state. Ryan pulled up a photo on his tablet showing a woman with a black eye and split lip. She gave a statement before leaving, said he was fine until he wasn't. That he could be charming for months, playing the good boyfriend, then something would flip and he'd turn into someone else. Said the worst part wasn't the hitting, it was the unpredictability. Never knowing which version of him was coming home. Priors? Bo leaned back, fingers steepled in the gesture that meant his mind was working through possibilities, calculating angles. Juvie records sealed, but our contact says theft and assault starting at age 14. He's been building to this his whole life. Escalating pattern of violence and fraud. Ryan set down the tablet. Easiest solution is the permanent kind. Make him disappear. Gulf's deep enough. No body, no case, no comeback. Bo shook his head. Too messy. Caroline Parker would spend the rest of her life waiting for him to come back, looking over her shoulder, jumping at shadows. Daisy would grow up wondering if monsters can return from the dead. They'd never have peace, never feel safe, and legally, they'd be tied to him forever. He'd be missing, not dead. No death certificate, no closure, just absence and fear. So what then? Ryan sat across from him, recognizing this expression. His boss had a plan forming. What Bo was about to set in motion would solve one problem, but create another. Because the trap he was building for Red Dalton would expose connections that powerful people wanted to stay hidden. Bo leaned forward, voice taking on the cold precision that indicated strategy in motion. Red Dalton wants easy money and no accountability. He wants the reward without the work. We give him exactly that. Ryan, you still have that contact at the Bureau field office? Johnson? Yeah, he owes us for the Birmingham thing. Said he'd return the favor anytime we needed. Ryan was already following the logic, seeing where this was heading. Good. Here's what we're going to do. The plan took shape over the next hour, Bo pacing while Ryan took notes, both of them refining details until it was airtight. Ryan would create a job posting for industrial equipment operator in Nevada, real company, one they'd shell-corporated years ago for exactly these kinds of operations. Fake position. The pay would be triple what Red made under the table. Cash signing bonus of $5,000 just for showing up to the interview. Housing provided, transportation stipend. All he had to do was drive out for the interview and do a skills assessment. The catch? The job site was 10 miles from a federal courthouse where those Alabama warrants were active and waiting to be served. And the Bureau would be waiting with very specific instructions about a certain Wade Dalton crossing state lines, which made federal charges possible, which meant no more bouncing between jurisdictions, no more state-level incompetence or indifference. He'll run, Ryan said. Men like him always run when they see federal agents. He can't run from federal custody, and once he's processed, Caroline files for a protective order citing his outstanding warrants and history of violence. We provide her with anonymous documentation, everything we've gathered, plus the Alabama charges, plus the Mississippi child support. Alabama wants him for fraud. Mississippi wants him for child support. Nevada can hold him until both states figure out who gets him first. Beau's smile was cold and satisfied. He's gone for 5 years minimum, maybe 10 if the charges stick right. And by the time he's out, Daisy will be 17. Caroline will have had a decade to build a new life. They'll be strong enough that he won't be able to touch them. What about his people? He's got friends at that construction site. Might come looking for him, asking questions. Ryan was thinking through contingencies, the way good second-in-commands did. No one fights for a man who abandons his girlfriend for a better paycheck. That's the story we make sure spreads. Red Dalton left Caroline and Daisy high and dry, chasing money in Nevada like the selfish bastard he's always been. Took his signing bonus and ghosted. She didn't leave him. He left her. Changes the narrative completely. She's the victim. He's the deadbeat. No one sympathizes with him. Ryan nodded slowly, seeing the elegance of it. Public perception was its own form of control. When do we move? Now. Post the job today. Make sure it hits his Facebook feed by tonight. Target the ad to men in his demographic, his interests, his location. Make it look organic. Men like Red are always looking for the easy way out, always convinced the next opportunity will be the big score that changes everything. We're just giving him a door that locks behind him. By noon, Ryan had the operation running. The job posting went live on 3 platforms. By 2 p.m., it had appeared in Red Dalton's Facebook feed, algorithmically targeted based on his job history and search patterns. By 4 p.m., Red had clicked on it, read it 3 times, and shared it to his timeline with the caption, "Finally catching a break." Beau watched it all unfold from his office, cameras showing Red's increasing excitement, his belief that he'd finally found the shortcut he'd been searching for his entire life. The trap was baited. Now they just had to wait for him to walk into it. The job posting appeared on Red Dalton's Facebook feed at 8:47 p.m. on a Thursday, placed with algorithmic precision among posts from his friends complaining about their jobs. By Friday morning, he'd called the number listed, reaching a pleasant woman who confirmed the position was still available and asked when he could come for an interview. By Friday afternoon, he'd told 3 people at Branson Construction he was leaving for a better opportunity out west, bragging about the pay increase and signing bonus. By Saturday, he was packing a duffel bag in the bedroom while Caroline watched from the doorway, telling him he'd send for her once he was settled. They both knew it was a lie. Red was leaving and he had no intention of bringing her to Nevada. But Caroline couldn't say that, couldn't acknowledge it, couldn't risk the rage that honesty might trigger. So she just nodded and said she'd miss him and started mentally counting the days until she'd have to face whatever came after his departure. But what Caroline didn't know yet was that Red Dalton's departure wasn't luck or coincidence. Someone powerful was pulling strings behind the scenes, and his freedom was about to become permanent. Beau watched it unfold from his office, surveillance feeds showing Red's excitement building as the trap closed around him like a fist. Red didn't tell Caroline about the warrants, probably didn't even remember them, had spent so long running from consequences that they'd become background noise he'd learned to ignore. Didn't tell her about the cash signing bonus that seemed too good to be true, because men like Red always believed they deserved luck they hadn't earned, that the universe owed them the success they'd never worked for. Just told her he'd be gone a few weeks, maybe a month. Told her not to worry, that he'd finally gotten a break, that things were looking up. Caroline's face on the video feed showed something that looked almost like relief before she buried it under appropriate concern. Beau saw that moment, saw her recognize freedom but feel too guilty to celebrate it, too conditioned to hope. She helped him pack, making herself useful the way she'd learned to do, avoiding conflict by being helpful, by being small, by not making demands or expressing opinions that might trigger him. On Monday morning, Red Dalton crossed into Nevada, driving a borrowed truck with a cooler full of beer and dreams of easy money. He'd left at 4 a.m. to beat traffic, to make good time, to arrive looking eager rather than desperate. The drive was long, 12 hours, but Red passed it drinking beer and listening to talk radio, imagining himself as the foreman of this new site, picturing the respect he'd command, the money he'd make, the life he'd finally build. He made it 6 miles past the state line before the lights appeared in his rearview mirror. Not local police. Federal agents in unmarked vehicles, 3 of them boxing him in with professional precision. They pulled him over on a stretch of empty highway where no one would witness Wade Dalton's last moment of freedom. Ryan called Bo at 10:15 a.m. He's in custody, tried to run, made it about 50 feet before they tackled him. Johnson says he's processing now. Alabama's already filed for extradition. Mississippi's right behind them. The federal prosecutor is looking at the interstate flight element. Might add charges there too. How long? Bo set down his coffee, the case he'd been reviewing forgotten. Judge sets bail tomorrow, but between the flight risk and the outstanding warrants? He's not seeing daylight until trial. Johnson's recommending no bail given his history of skipping court dates, failure to appear on previous charges. The man's established a pattern. Judge will see that. Bo closed his eyes for a moment, allowing himself one breath of satisfaction. Tell Johnson we appreciate his cooperation. The usual consideration will be in his account by Friday. Make it generous. He came through exactly when we needed him. He opened his eyes. And Ryan, make sure Caroline Parker knows she can file that protective order now. Send her the information anonymously. Complete packet with all the forms filled out. Instructions on where to file. Documentation of Red's arrest. Let her think she figured it out herself. Give her agency in this. Don't make her feel like we're puppeting her life. That night would mark the beginning of Caroline and Daisy's new life. But what they didn't know was that their guardian angel was still watching, and his protection would extend far beyond just removing the monster. That night, for the first time in weeks, Caroline and Daisy Parker slept in an apartment without monsters waiting in the darkness. The phone didn't ring with Red's drunken demands. The stairs didn't shake with his heavy footsteps. The walls didn't remember violence they wanted to forget. The apartment was quiet. Just quiet. The kind of silence that used to feel peaceful before it became the absence of threat, rather than the presence of peace. Daisy woke once at 2 a.m., listening for the sounds that always came, the key in the lock, the boots on the floor, the voice that started loud and got louder. When silence remained, when minutes passed and no monster arrived, she walked to her mother's room and found Caroline awake too, both of them afraid to believe the quiet was real, afraid that hope might be punished, that safety might be temporary. "Maybe he's really gone this time," Daisy whispered, climbing into her mother's bed the way she hadn't done since she was 4, before Red arrived and made everything dangerous. Caroline pulled her daughter close, breathing in the smell of her shampoo and childhood and futures that might finally be possible. "Maybe," she said, not letting herself hope too hard yet. But in her pocket was an anonymous envelope that had appeared in her mailbox that afternoon. Inside was information about Red's arrest, the outstanding warrants, step-by-step instructions for filing a protective order, and a note. "You deserve to be free. The system will help you now. Be brave." Whoever had sent it knew details only someone powerful could know. The exact charges, the arresting agents' names, the courthouse locations. And Caroline Parker, who'd learned to recognize protection when she saw it, understood that someone dangerous was keeping them safe. Someone who had resources and knowledge and reach. Someone who'd made Wade Dalton disappear like he'd never existed. She thought about the magnolias Daisy had brought home, the card with a phone number, The way her daughter had seemed lighter after that trip to the library. And Caroline understood that she'd been protected without asking, that someone had seen their suffering and decided it mattered, that her daughter had been brave enough to ask for help when Caroline had been too afraid to seek it. If you've ever felt trapped by someone who made you feel powerless, or if you know someone living in fear of a monster they can't escape, drop a comment and let them know they're not alone. Sometimes the hardest part is believing that help exists. Share this story, because someone watching might be exactly like Daisy, needing to know that asking for help isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing you can do. The first envelope arrived on a Tuesday, slipped under Caroline's apartment door while she was at work, appearing like magic in the afternoon hours when the building was empty and quiet. No return address, just her name written in neat print that suggested computer-generated mail merge, rather than personal correspondence. Inside was cash, $500 in 20s, and a note typed on plain paper. For the refrigerator that's been broken for 3 months, you shouldn't have to live like this. Caroline stood in her kitchen holding money she hadn't earned, fighting tears she didn't understand. The refrigerator had been making that sick grinding noise since July, the compressor struggling, the temperature inconsistent enough that she'd been worried about food safety but unable to afford the repair. Red had promised to fix it. Had tools, had mechanical knowledge, then forgotten, then got angry when she mentioned it. Accused her of nagging, of being ungrateful. She'd been saving tips in a jar, $3 at a time, trying to reach the $200 a repair would cost. At her current rate, she'd have enough by March. Maybe. Wednesday morning, she called a repairman, half expecting him to quote some astronomical figure that would make the envelope money seem like a down payment rather than a solution. But he looked at the unit, hummed thoughtfully, and said the compressor could be replaced for $400. By Wednesday evening, her refrigerator hummed quietly like refrigerators should, no longer threatening to die and take a week's worth of carefully budgeted groceries with it. The food inside actually stayed cold. The freezer actually froze. It was such a small thing, a working refrigerator, but it felt like luxury after months of making do. While Caroline was discovering these anonymous gifts, she had no idea just how extensively someone was rebuilding her life. What came next would make her question everything about kindness and cost. Thursday, another envelope. This time $700 and a note. Your car inspection is 2 months overdue. The brake pads are dangerous. Your daughter rides in that car. Fix it today. Caroline sat in her car outside the diner, hands shaking on the steering wheel. The envelope burning in her purse like evidence of some crime she didn't understand. She'd known about the brakes, had been pumping them carefully at stop signs, praying they'd hold until she could afford the $300 the mechanic had quoted months ago. Had been terrified every time Daisy rode in the car, but unable to fix what she couldn't afford. Had made bargains with God. Let the brakes hold until payday. Let them last through winter. Let them not fail when my daughter is with me. Friday, she took the car to Jackson's Auto, expecting judgment, expecting to be told the damage was worse than she thought, expecting the bill to somehow exceed the money she'd been given. But Jackson looked at the car and nodded. Yep, brake pads and rotors. $700 should cover it with the inspection. Like he'd been expecting her. Like someone had called ahead. By Friday evening, her Civic had new brake pads, new rotors, a fresh inspection sticker, and an oil change she hadn't even known she needed. The mechanic told her someone had called ahead and covered everything, but when she asked who, he just shrugged and said the payment came through certified, money was good, and her car was safe now. That was all that mattered, wasn't it? The following Monday, Daisy came home from school with a letter from the principal's office, her eyes wide with excitement. Caroline opened it with the dread that always accompanied official school correspondence. expecting complaints about unpaid lunch balances or missing field trip money. Instead, she found notification that Daisy had been enrolled in the after-school tutoring program. At no cost to your family, sponsored by an anonymous community scholarship. The program included homework help with certified teachers, dinner, actual dinner, not just snacks, and safe supervision until 6 p.m. when Caroline's shift ended. No more leaving Daisy alone after school. No more worrying about her walking home by herself. No more guilt about not being able to afford after-school care. The letter was matter of fact, but Caroline read it 3 times, looking for the catch, the hidden cost, the strings that must be attached. Tuesday, the property management company called. Her rent, which had been 2 months behind, late fees accumulating like accusations, eviction notice threatened but not yet filed, had been paid in full by an anonymous benefactor. They wanted to inform her that she was current through the end of the year and shouldn't worry about the November and December payments. They'd been covered in advance. "Someone really looking out for you," the office manager said. "Wish all our tenants had guardian angels." Caroline sat on her apartment floor after that call and cried the way she hadn't let herself cry when Red was there. Cried with relief and confusion and the terrifying hope that maybe, finally, something good was happening. Cried because for the first time in years, she wasn't behind on everything, wasn't drowning, wasn't failing. Someone had seen her struggling and decided to help, not with judgment or condescension, but with practical assistance that solved actual problems. But Caroline was about to discover that every gift came with a truth she needed to face. The man protecting her wasn't just being kind, he was building something bigger than either of them understood. But it was the flowers that confirmed what she'd been suspecting. Thursday evening, a delivery arrived. Magnolias wrapped in brown paper, expensive and beautiful and completely unnecessary. The card said only, "Beauty should be celebrated, not beaten down." Caroline recognized that phrase immediately. Had heard it from Daisy the day her daughter brought home an elaborate bouquet and a story about the flower stand owner being generous. Except the flower stand owner didn't have money for anonymous rent payments and car repairs and scholarships. The flower stand owner didn't have the kind of reach that made school programs materialize, and property management companies accept mysterious payments without question. But Lawson Carter did. Caroline stood at her kitchen window looking out at the parking lot where Red used to park crooked across 2 spaces. The space was empty now. Had been empty for 2 weeks. Everything was empty now. Empty of violence. Empty of fear. Empty of the constant calculation of survival that had been her background noise for 2 years. And into that emptiness, someone powerful was pouring protection disguised as charity. Someone who knew exactly what she needed before she asked. Someone who'd made Wade Dalton disappear like he'd never existed. She pulled out the white card Daisy had shown her weeks ago, the one with just a phone number, no name. The one her daughter claimed came from the flower stand, but Caroline knew better. She'd lived in this neighborhood long enough to understand how power worked. Lawson Carter was a name people whispered, a presence that shaped the area through reputation and action, and his power was the kind that could crush or protect, depending on his mood. Her daughter was sleeping peacefully for the first time in months, her nightmares fading, her laughter returning. Her car was safe. Her brakes would stop when she needed them to. Her job was secure now that she wasn't constantly exhausted from terror, wasn't distracted by fear. Her apartment was warm and quiet and clean, no longer a crime scene waiting to happen. Someone had given her back her life. And Caroline Parker, who'd learned that nothing came free, who'd been taught that kindness always had a price, wondered what the price would eventually be. But tonight, holding magnolias that smelled like hope, arranging them in the good vase she'd inherited from her grandmother, she decided not to care. Tonight, she'd just breathe. Tonight, she'd just be grateful. Tomorrow, she could worry about costs and consequences. But tonight, in an apartment that felt like home for the first time in 2 years, she'd just let herself be safe. The invitation arrived on a Sunday, hand-delivered by a young man in a suit who looked like he'd never smiled in his life, whose face was professionally neutral in the way that indicated extensive training in not reacting to anything. Mr. Carter requests the pleasure of your company for coffee. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., the Garden Room on 5th Street. He understands if you're unable to attend, but hopes you'll consider it. The young man handed her a business card with an address and a phone number, then disappeared before Caroline could form a response, walking to a black car that pulled away with the quiet efficiency of expensive engineering. She should have been terrified. Should have recognized this for what it was. A summons disguised as an invitation. Power flexing itself politely. The kind of request that wasn't really a request at all. But Caroline Parker had spent the last 6 weeks living in the kind of peace she'd forgotten existed. Her daughter laughed again, the sound no longer rare and startling. Her bruises had faded, the yellow-green marks on her arms and ribs disappearing like evidence of a crime that was finally over. Her apartment felt like a home instead of a battlefield, and she knew, with the certainty that came from witnessing miracles she hadn't asked for, that Lawson Carter was responsible for all of it. What Caroline didn't know was that this meeting would change everything. The conversation she was about to have would reveal truths about protection, power, and the real cost of being saved by someone who lived in shadows. Monday morning, she borrowed a dress from her coworker Rosa. Simple, navy blue, respectable. The kind of dress that said she took this seriously but wasn't trying too hard. Dropped Daisy at school with extra lunch money and a kiss that lasted longer than necessary. Breathing in her daughter's shampoo smell, grateful for the mundane morning routine that 2 months ago had seemed impossible. Took the bus to 5th Street, even though her newly repaired car sat in the parking lot, because she needed the time to prepare for whatever came next. Needed the 40 minutes of bus stops and traffic to settle her nerves. To rehearse possible conversations. To armor herself for a meeting that might change everything. The Garden Room was the kind of place Caroline had walked past 100 times without entering. White tablecloths, fresh flowers on every table, the smell of expensive coffee and quiet money. Crystal water glasses, real silverware that didn't come from a big box store. The kind of establishment where the servers wore pressed white shirts and moved with the efficiency of dancers. The hostess smiled warmly, genuine, not fake, and led her to a corner table where Lawson Carter sat with his back to the wall, watching her approach with eyes that missed nothing. He stood when she arrived. Southern manners that seemed at odds with his reputation, but fit perfectly with the man before her. "Mrs. Parker, thank you for coming." His voice carried that soft drawl she'd heard in Daisy's stories, gentle but weighted with authority that didn't need to shout. He was handsome in a dangerous way, sharp cheekbones, careful eyes, the kind of face that revealed nothing but saw everything. "It's Ms. Parker," she corrected, sitting across from him in the chair he held for her, noting the small courtesy. "I never married Red, never married anyone. Parker is my maiden name." "My apologies, Ms. Parker." He signaled the waiter with a gesture so subtle Caroline almost missed it. "Coffee? Tea? This place makes a decent breakfast if you're hungry. I recommend the French toast." "Just coffee." Her hands were steady on the table, which surprised her. She'd expected tremors, expected her voice to shake. "Black, please." They sat in silence while the waiter poured, the moment stretching between them like a contract neither had signed, but both understood. Beau didn't rush, didn't fill the silence with empty words or small talk. Just waited until she was ready, giving her control in a situation where he held all the power. It was a gift, she realized. In a meeting where he could have dominated, he was offering her space to choose when and how to begin. "You helped us," Caroline finally said. "Not a question." A statement that demanded acknowledgement, that refused to play games or pretend ignorance. I did, Bo confirmed. No denials, no pretense, no false modesty. Just acknowledgement of fact. Why? The question was bigger than it seemed. Why them? Why her? Why risk whatever he'd risked to help strangers? Because your daughter asked me to. He leaned back in his chair, hands resting on the table, completely relaxed in a way that suggested he'd had this conversation in his head a dozen times before actually having it. 6 weeks ago, Daisy Lynn walked up to me at Miller's flower stand and offered me $4.73 to fight her monsters. She described Wade Dalton's violence with the kind of precision that comes from documenting survival, from counting bruises and tracking patterns. And she did it without crying, without hesitation, with the bravery of someone who'd already exhausted every other option. She'd tried everything else. I was her last resort. And I couldn't... He paused, something flickering behind his controlled expression. I couldn't walk away from that. Caroline's throat tightened. Emotion threatening to compromise the composure she'd built on the bus ride over. She told me she went to the library that day. She did. Eventually. Bo's expression softened almost imperceptibly, the hard lines of his face easing for just a moment. But first, she tried to hire me, offered me everything she had in exchange for safety she should have had without asking. Safety that should have been her birthright rather than something she had to purchase with coins from a wishing fountain. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze direct and unwavering. I told her she didn't need to pay me. I told her I'd handle it. And I did. You made Red disappear. Not a question, an acknowledgement. I made sure Wade Dalton faced consequences that were already waiting for him. Outstanding warrants, unpaid child support, fraud charges. The man was a federal case walking. I just gave him a path that led straight into the justice system's arms. He made the choices. He wrote those bad checks. He abandoned those children. He skipped those court dates. I just connected the dots. Bo's voice carried no apology, no regret. He'll be gone for years. Long enough for you and Daisy to build a life without him. Long enough that when he gets out, if he gets out, Daisy will be grown, and you'll be strong enough that he won't be able to touch either of you. And the money? The car, the rent, the flowers, the scholarship? Caroline's voice remained steady, but inside she was reeling. Inside she was trying to reconcile this careful man with the stories she'd heard, the reputation that preceded him. That's just making sure you have the stability to build that life, Faye. You can't move forward if you're drowning in late fees and broken appliances. If you're worried about your car killing your daughter because the brakes don't work. If you're facing eviction. He met her gaze directly, his eyes dark and serious. I'm not asking for anything in return, Ms. Parker. No debts, no obligations. You don't owe me anything, not a thing. You and Daisy are free, completely free. But Caroline was about to learn something that would change how she understood everything. What Bo was offering wasn't just protection, it was redemption for a boy who'd never been saved himself. Caroline studied him, this dangerous man who'd saved them without being asked, who sat across from her in a place he clearly owned or controlled, speaking of violence and protection like they were business transactions. I don't believe that. Men like you don't give away help for free. Everything has a price. I've lived long enough to know that. You're right, Bo said quietly, and the honesty of it surprised her. I don't, but your daughter paid me in a currency I'd forgotten existed. She reminded me what it feels like to be powerless, to be small, to be terrified in your own home and have no one who'll listen, no one who'll help, no one who even sees you. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I was 5 years old when I learned my father was a monster. 7 when I stopped believing anyone would save us. 12 when he finally died, and I realized I'd survived something that should have killed me. The confession hung between them, raw and unexpected. Caroline saw past the reputation in that moment, past the power and the control. Straight to the wounded boy who'd built armor so thick he'd forgotten what it felt like to be vulnerable. The boy who'd survived by becoming exactly the kind of man others feared, so he'd never be afraid again. So you saved us because no one saved you. Her voice was soft, understanding bleeding through the words. I saved you because Daisy had the courage to ask when I never did. Bo corrected, his voice gentle but firm. And because walking away from her would have meant becoming my father. Becoming the kind of man who sees suffering and chooses not to care. Who has power and uses it only for himself. He leaned forward slightly. I'm not a good man, Ms. Parker. I've done things that would keep you awake at night. Things I can't undo and won't apologize for because they were necessary. But I'm trying to be better than the man who made me. And helping Daisy, helping you, helps me believe that's possible. That I'm not just what he created, that I have a choice in who I become. The confession settled between them like an offering, like vulnerability weaponized into connection. Caroline felt her carefully constructed defenses cracking, felt understanding replacing fear. This man had demons, but he was fighting them in the only way he knew how, by protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. What happens now? She asked. Now you live your life. You and Daisy. You build whatever future you want. And if you ever need anything, if Red somehow comes back, if you're in danger, if there's an emergency, you call that number on the card I gave Daisy. Someone will answer. Someone will come. That's a permanent offer, Ms. Parker. Not a temporary protection. Permanent. Why? The question came out smaller than she intended. Why do you care what happens to us? Bo smiled, small and sad and honest. Because 30 years ago, I was a boy hiding from monsters and praying someone would notice. And no one did. No one saw. No one helped. I survived anyway, but I didn't have to survive alone. Shouldn't have had to. His eyes held hers. Daisy saw me. She saw past the reputation and the fear and everything I've built, and she asked me for help. That takes courage I didn't have at her age. She deserves better than what I got. You both do. Caroline felt tears threaten but refused to let them fall. Thank you. For everything. For seeing us. For helping. For... Her voice broke. For making it stop. You're welcome. Bo's voice was gentle. Now go raise your daughter. Let her be 7 years old. Let her laugh and play and read books about dragons without worrying about the monster at home. That's payment enough. Her happiness. That's all I need. Caroline left the garden room with her coffee unfinished and her heart lighter than it had been in years. She didn't owe him. He'd said so, and she believed him. But she was grateful, and gratitude was something she could live with. Something that didn't hurt to carry. 3 months later, Caroline found Bo sitting on a bench outside Daisy's school, watching the playground from a distance that maintained plausible deniability while still allowing clear observation. She sat beside him without invitation, her nursing scrubs suggesting she'd come straight from her new job at the hospital. Better pay, better hours, benefits that actually covered things. A position that had mysteriously opened when she'd applied. An interview that had felt more like a formality than an actual assessment. You're not subtle, she said, watching her daughter play on the swings, her laughter carrying across the playground. Wasn't trying to be, Bo replied, not taking his eyes off the playground where Daisy was laughing with friends, her ivory dress replaced by the comfortable chaos of normal childhood. Jeans with grass stains, a t-shirt with a cartoon character, sneakers that fit, hair in a ponytail that was messy because she'd tied it herself, not because exhausted hands had done their best under impossible circumstances. just wanted to see her happy. What neither of them knew yet was that this moment, this quiet watching, would lead to something neither expected. A family built from trauma and protection, and the recognition that saving someone else sometimes saved you too. She asks about you. Caroline's voice was quiet. Wants to know if the man who fought her monsters is doing okay. If he's safe. If anyone's protecting him the way he protected us. I told her I didn't know. That men like you don't usually check in. Men like me? There was no offense in the question, just curiosity about how she'd categorized him. Men who save people and then disappear. Men who do the right thing and don't stick around for the thank you. She turned to look at him, studying his profile. She thinks you're a guardian angel. Tells everyone at school about the brave man who made the bad guy go away. She's turned you into a fairy tale. Beau's expression didn't change, but something softened around his eyes. I'm not an angel, Ms. Parker. Far from it. I know what you are, Mr. Carter. Caroline's voice carried weight, carried knowledge she hadn't had 3 months ago. I've lived in this neighborhood long enough to hear stories. I know your reputation. I know what you do, what you control, who you are in the dark. I've heard the rumors and the warnings and the whispered conversations that stop when certain people walk by. And yet you're still sitting here. He finally turned to look at her, genuinely curious. Because I also know what you did for us. Not just removing Red, but everything after. The money, the job, the safety, the peace. The way you gave us back our lives without asking for anything in return. She paused. Daisy sleeps through the night now. Did you know that? No nightmares. No counting ceiling tiles. No waking up at 2 a.m. listening for footsteps. She just sleeps like children should sleep. 8, 9 hours sometimes. Just normal. Caroline's eyes were bright with emotion she didn't hide. You gave my daughter back her childhood. She's reading books for pleasure instead of escape. She's making friends instead of isolating. She's learning to trust again. And I don't care what you do in the dark. I don't care what choices you've made or what your empire is built on. I care that you chose to step into the light for her. For us. That when it mattered, when a child asked you for help, you said yes. They sat in silence, watching Daisy play. She was on the monkey bars now, swinging from rung to rung with the confidence of a child who wasn't afraid of falling because she knew someone would catch her. Finally, Beau spoke. I have dinners every Sunday at my house. Small gathering. Ryan and his wife, usually. Couple other people from my life who've become family. Nothing fancy, just food and conversation. Stories and laughter. Normal things. He didn't look at Caroline. You and Daisy would be welcome. If you wanted. No pressure. No obligation. Just an open invitation. Why? The question was gentle, not challenging. Because Sunday dinners shouldn't be lonely. And because Daisy deserves to know the man who fought her monsters isn't just a stranger who disappeared. That I'm real. That I still care. That she can see me and I'll still be there. He finally turned to face her. I'm not asking for a relationship, Ms. Parker. I'm not trying to replace anyone or be anyone. I'm just offering presence. If you want it. And if you don't, that's fine too. The offer stands regardless. But I think maybe it would be good for all of us. To see that the story has a good ending. That everyone's okay. Caroline studied him for a long moment, weighing options, considering angles. What's the catch? No catch. You can say no. You can come once and never again. You can bring Daisy and leave her with me if you want an afternoon to yourself. I've got Elena and Ryan there. Proper supervision. Completely safe. You can come monthly instead of weekly. You can bring a friend if that makes you more comfortable. His voice was steady, patient. I'm just offering what I never had. A safe adult who didn't hurt me. Who was just there, present, reliable. Daisy deserves at least one of those in her life. She has me. The defensiveness was automatic, protective. She does. And you're doing an extraordinary job raising her alone. Better than most people could do with a partner and resources. Beau's expression softened. But I'm offering backup. The kind that doesn't come with strings or expectations. Just presence. Just someone else in her corner. Every kid deserves a full team. You're a hell of a coach. I'm just offering to be on the bench. To show up. To care. Caroline thought about it. Thought about the risks and the benefits. Thought about what message it would send to Daisy to have this man in their lives regularly. And she realized the message would be, you matter enough that people will show up for you. Your life has value. You're worth protecting. Okay, she said. We'll come this Sunday. Just to see. No promises about making it a regular thing. That's all I'm asking. Just to see. That Sunday dinner would become the first of many. What started as gratitude would transform into something none of them expected. A family forged not by blood, but by choice, by protection, by the recognition that sometimes the people who save us need saving too. That Sunday, Caroline and Daisy showed up at Beau's house with store-bought cookies and nervous energy. The house was beautiful. A restored Victorian on the good side of town, painted pale blue with white trim, garden flourishing in the front yard. Daisy held her mother's hand tightly as they walked up the path, excitement and nerves warring on her face. Beau answered the door in jeans and a simple button-down shirt, looking more like a regular man than a crime lord. No suit, no intimidation, just human. Ms. Parker, Daisy Lynn, I'm so glad you came. Come in. Come in. Ryan and his wife, Elena, greeted them warmly. Elena was petite and cheerful, the kind of woman whose smile made you feel like you'd known her for years. She took the cookies with genuine enthusiasm and immediately enlisted Daisy's help in setting the table. Ryan shook Caroline's hand with quiet respect, his eyes kind, his manner gentle. Dinner was pot roast and mashed potatoes and green beans cooked with bacon. Home-style food, comfort food, the kind of meal that tasted like safety. And laughter. So much laughter. Ryan told a story about a fishing trip gone wrong. Elena teased Beau about his terrible singing voice. Daisy talked about her tutoring program and her improving math grades and the book about dragons she was reading. Beau listened with the focus he brought to business negotiations, asking questions that made her feel heard, responding with genuine interest, treating her observations like they mattered. What kind of dragons? He asked. The fire-breathing kind or the ice kind? Both. But the ice dragons are cooler because they live in crystal caves and they can freeze time if they need to protect their families. Her eyes shone with excitement. Ice dragons sound very wise. Protecting family is the most important thing. Beau smiled. Maybe next time you can tell me more about them. When they were leaving, Daisy hugged him, quick and fierce, the way children hug people they trust completely, without reservation or fear. Thank you for fighting my monsters, Mr. Carter, she whispered against his shoulder. Beau's arms came around her carefully, his eyes closing for just a moment as something inside him cracked and healed simultaneously. Thank you for asking me to, Daisy Lynn. Thank you for being brave. She pulled back and looked up at him with absolute certainty, with the wisdom of children who've survived what they shouldn't have had to survive. I knew you would. I saw it in your eyes that day. You have monsters too, don't you? Inside you? But you don't let them win. Beau's throat tightened. No, baby girl. I don't let them win. I fight them every day. And you help me fight them. Did you know that? You help me remember why the fight matters. Good. She smiled, the expression pure and trusting. 'Cause monsters are only scary if you let them be. That's what my mama says. And you're way stronger than any monster. The system fails people like Caroline and Daisy every single day. Abusers walk free because victims are too scared to speak up, or because the people who should help turn a blind eye. But this story proves something powerful. Sometimes it takes just one person paying attention to change everything. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button. Because stories about people who refuse to look away matter. And if you know someone trapped in a situation like this, be their Lawson Carter. See them, help them, be the person who shows up when everyone else walks away. Caroline and Daisy drove home in their safe car through their safe neighborhood to their safe apartment. Bo stood in his driveway watching them go, Ryan beside him in companionable silence. The evening air was cool. Autumn finally arriving after the long summer. "You did a good thing, boss," Ryan said quietly. "Doesn't make up for the rest of it." Bo's voice was reflective, honest in a way he rarely allowed himself to be. "Maybe not, but it's a start, and maybe that's enough." Bo thought about that as he went back inside to help Elena clean up. Thought about the 5-year-old boy he'd been, hiding from monsters no one fought. Thought about Daisy, who'd had the courage he'd lacked, who'd asked for help instead of suffering in silence. Thought about Caroline, who'd trusted him despite knowing what he was, who'd let him into her daughter's life despite every reasonable reason not to. And he thought about Sunday dinners that would continue. About this strange family that had formed from trauma and protection, and the recognition that saving someone else sometimes saved you, too. About the fact that he'd built an empire on fear, but it was a 7-year-old girl's bravery that had finally given him peace. He wasn't his father, wasn't the monster that had made him. He'd spent 30 years becoming someone different, someone powerful enough that no one could hurt him. But it was only now, helping Daisy, that he realized power wasn't about making people fear you. It was about using what you had to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Because Daisy had looked at him, really looked, and seen not danger, but safety. Not a monster, but a man who'd chosen to fight them. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. Maybe redemption looked like magnolia bouquets and Sunday dinners, and a 7-year-old girl who slept through the night because someone finally answered when she asked for help. Maybe the boy he used to be, scared and alone and convinced no one cared, could finally rest. Because he'd become the person he'd needed. He'd answered the call that no one answered for him. And that, Bo thought as he dried dishes while Elena washed and Ryan put away leftovers, that might be the only redemption that mattered. The monsters hadn't won. Not in his life. Not in Daisy's. And as long as he had breath and power, and the memory of what it felt like to be helpless, he'd make sure they never won again. If this story touched your heart, please share in the comments where you're watching from around the world. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs a reminder that help sometimes comes from the most unexpected places. Your support keeps these stories coming.